Well, this new discussion paper is from us as the trade association, obviously, for the collections and debt purchase sector. And look, there's a lot of debate that's been going on about how the public sector collect its debts that are owed to it, because, of course, if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer, sometimes looking at where to bring money in order to pay for vital public services, they often think, well, do they have to raise taxes generally? Do they have to cut public spending? Or is there a third way, which is making sure you bring in the money that's owed to the government in the first place in the most effective and fair way possible? Now, there's quite a lot of differences between the way the private sector approaches collections and the public sector. And many people will say, well, those differences, are they justified when the private sector offers more forbearance? So if you owe money, for instance, on a credit card, for example, you're given perhaps more time to repay, lots of different payment options that are offered. That's not necessarily offered in the public sector in the same way. So this discussion paper is just looking at, are there other options and different ways in which the public sector could learn from private sector experience? And we raise a number of different questions, 10 different questions actually, for discussion generally that we want to spark the debate on. Well, it's pretty important now to have this discussion because I think the debate and the argument is moving to this question about, should there be more equal treatment for the public regardless of the type of debt that they have? We know that the Treasury is working more closely on a lot of these issues. They just published their fresh government debt strategy, which is quite a modern approach really to engaging with customers, making sure that they are talking about the question of forbearance, understanding the vulnerabilities that different customers might have and that need to be taken into account. And of course, they're really interested more and more in learning from the private sector. And as the trade body representing the private sector collections industry, we obviously want to talk to them about some of the best practices that we have. It's very highly regulated in lots of ways, public sector less so, and some of those standards are things that we should be talking about in terms of the professionalism and the expectations that the public ought to have if they want to be treated fairly and make sure they have a proper forbearance and are listened to if they've got any difficulties and they want to engage in a reasonable way. Well, in terms of what's likely to be most interesting from this discussion paper for people reading it, well, always comes up is new technologies. Now, the private sector is pretty good at using all these different channels to talk to the public, and often customers are very different. Some people want to have a conversation on a telephone, other people will want to email, some people don't want to have any interaction with another human being, so they want to deal with it all in text messages and so forth. That's not always the case when you have to deal with the public sector. But I think it's time for the public sector to learn from the private sector's use of technologies, but I do think that sometimes they find that quite difficult because obviously the volumes can be quite significant for the public sector. Other things that I think might be sparking a bit of debate, use of debt sale in the public sector. It does happen, but less so than it does in the private sector. It has lots of benefits that the private sector certainly can see in terms of bringing revenues in early up front. I think there's an argument that the vital public services need that money up front, but a lot of people don't understand the way that the private sector works. So that could be one issue. Another issue that often comes up is local authorities' council tax. They have a very particular way of approaching enforcement and collections, and that can also be a source of debate that happens quite a lot. So undoubtedly, some of the discussion points that we've got in our paper will get people talking. Well, in March this year, the Treasury published this new debt management strategy that's going to last all the way to 2030, and it is quite useful document because it's covering the tone and the approach that are going to happen across 40 different government departments and public bodies. I think it's a really positive document because it's talking much more about engaging with customers and with the general public, how they want to do that. Are they being proactive? What kind of communications people have? And they talk a lot about affordability. They talk a lot about recognising that certain people will have vulnerabilities. It's really moving away from just talking about collecting debt to resolving debt. And I think that's a really positive, more modern approach that the Treasury seem to be signalling with this new strategy.